Napoleon Bonaparte. A name that echoes through history with both admiration and fear.
I must warn you, I will not lead a second in command.
Some remember him as a genius who reshaped Europe. Others see him as a tyrant who drowned it in blood. But behind the grand portraits and the myths lies a story, an untold story, of a man who rose from nothing, reached the pinnacle of power, and then lost it all. He was born in 1769 on the Mediterranean island of Corsica, a place of rugged mountains and proud traditions. The Bonaparte family was of minor Italian nobility, but far from wealthy. Young Napoleon grew up in a household filled with strong personalities, especially his mother, Letizia, who taught him discipline, resilience, and survival. France had just conquered Corsica the year before his birth, and Napoleon grew up hearing tales of rebellion against the French. Ironically, it would be France that would give him his chance at greatness. At 9 years old, Napoleon left his family to study at a military school in mainland France. It was a harsh transition. He was mocked for his Corsican accent, his manners, and his outsider status. He was lonely, bitter, and determined to prove himself. In these years, he buried himself in books, history, strategy, mathematics, dreaming of becoming not just a soldier, but a leader who could command destiny itself. The French Revolution broke out in 1789, turning the old order upside down. The monarchy fell, chaos spread, and France was torn apart. For ambitious officers like Napoleon, this chaos was opportunity. In 1793, during the Siege of Toulon, a city held by royalists and their British allies, Napoleon was a young artillery officer. He proposed a bold plan to drive out the enemy with carefully placed cannons. His strategy worked. The British fled, and Toulon fell. Almost overnight, Napoleon's name began to shine. He was just 24 years old. Soon after, he was promoted to general and sent to command the Army of Italy. His soldiers were poor, hungry, and demoralized, yet Napoleon inspired them with fiery speeches, promising glory and riches. Then, with daring speed, he launched his campaigns. Against larger Austrian forces, he used brilliant maneuvers, striking quickly, dividing enemies, and overwhelming them before they could unite. Victories at battles like Lodi and Arcole turned him into a legend. His soldiers adored him, calling him the Little Corporal, not because of his height, but because he stood with them, ate with them, and shared their struggles. But Napoleon's ambitions stretched beyond Europe. In 1798, he set his sights on Egypt. He dreamed of cutting Britain's trade routes and building a French empire in the East. The Egyptian campaign was a mix of glory and disaster. His army defeated the Mamluks in dramatic battles under the shadow of the pyramids, and scholars traveling with him discovered the Rosetta Stone, unlocking the secrets of ancient Egypt. But then came disaster at sea. Admiral Nelson and the British Navy destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon was stranded. In a move that shocked many, he abandoned his army and secretly returned to France. Yet instead of disgrace, he was welcomed home as a hero. France was desperate for strong leadership, and Napoleon was ready. By 1799, the French government was weak and unpopular. In a bold coup, Napoleon seized control, declaring himself first consul. He reformed laws, stabilized the economy, and restored order. But ambition does not rest. In 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French in a grand ceremony in Paris. In front of the Pope, he took the crown in his own hands and placed it on his head. It was a message to the world. His power came from no one but himself. Then began an era of breathtaking victories. In 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleon faced the combined armies of Austria and Russia. He deliberately appeared weak, luring them into attacking, before crushing them with a devastating counterstrike. It became known as his greatest masterpiece. At Jena in 1806, he humbled the mighty Prussians. Across Europe, thrones toppled, borders shifted, and Napoleon placed his own family members as kings and rulers. His empire stretched from Spain to Poland. For a moment, he seemed unstoppable, yet power breeds enemies. Britain, undefeated at sea, remained his greatest rival. In Spain, guerrilla fighters bled his armies dry in a brutal war of resistance. And then came his most fateful decision, the invasion of Russia in 1812. Napoleon marched with the largest army Europe had ever seen, over 600,000 men. At first, the Russians retreated, refusing open battle, burning villages and supplies as they went. By the time Napoleon entered Moscow, the city was in flames, abandoned. There was no victory, only silence. Winter closed in, and the retreat began. Hunger, frostbite, and disease decimated his men. Of the 600,000 who marched in, barely 100,000 returned. The invincible emperor had been broken. Europe sensed weakness. In 1814, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia closed in. Napoleon fought bravely in a series of battles, but the numbers were against him. He was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the small island of Elba. For most men, this would have been the end, but Napoleon was not most men. In 1815, he escaped Elba and returned to France. The moment he stepped onto French soil, soldiers sent to arrest him confronted him. He opened his coat and declared, "If you will shoot your emperor, shoot him now." Instead, the soldiers embraced him, crying, "Vive l'Empereur!" In a matter of days, Napoleon marched back to Paris and reclaimed power. This was the legendary 100 Days, but Europe would not give him another chance. At Waterloo in June 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington and the Prussians. The battle raged all day, but mistakes, mud, and timing doomed him. Late arriving Prussian forces sealed his fate. Napoleon was defeated once and for all. This time, there was no escape. He was exiled to St. Helena, a lonely island in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from Europe. There, surrounded by British guards, he spent his last years writing his memoirs, blaming fate, betrayal, and even the weather for his downfall. He never stopped believing in his destiny. On May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, Napoleon Bonaparte died, far from the empire he had once ruled. His story is one of the most extraordinary in history. A boy mocked as an outsider became the master of Europe. A general of unmatched brilliance became an emperor who crowned himself. And a man who seemed invincible fell, not once but twice, leaving behind both admiration and hatred. To some, he was a visionary who brought reforms, modern laws, and meritocracy. To others, he was a tyrant whose ambition caused endless wars. Yet one thing is certain, Napoleon Bonaparte was more than a man. He was a force of nature, a symbol of how one individual can bend history to his will, for better or worse. And though his empire crumbled, his legend has never died.